Hello, Facebook family, YouTube family. This is Reverend Dr. John W. Wilson III bringing you the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, July 14, 2019. And the title is Jesus Teaches Us to Love One Another. It comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, all the way to verse 32. And we're going to have a great lesson today. We have been in a continuation of chapter 5. And what Jesus is doing, he's on the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot of crowd that's around him. There are Pharisees and scribes and religious leaders mixed in that crowd who do not like him. And Jesus has gone to the mountain. The disciples has followed him. And he's giving instructions really to the disciples, but other people are hearing it. And the reason why he's giving it to the disciples because they are followers of him. So that gives us an indication what the Sermon on the Mount is geared toward. It's geared toward those who claim to be or who are followers of Jesus Christ, those who are kingdom people, those who are seeking after Christ. How should we live? And he begins with the Beatitudes, and he talks about what should we, the kingdom people, look like on the inside. Those who follow Christ, those who have a passion for Christ, those who have committed their lives to Christ. What should they be like on the inside? Poor in spirit, things of that nature there. They should not like injustice. They should abhor evil, things we talked about before. And then those who are followers of Christ, those who are passionate about Christ, those who have committed their lives to Christ, they are the salt and light of the earth. And we are supposed to shine for the glory of God, draw people to Christ. And so here, when we get to verse 21, Jesus is concerned about having a righteousness that exceeds those of the Pharisees and scribes. If you remember, the Pharisees and scribes focused on the external. For them, everything had to look good from the outside. They had to walk a certain way. They dressed a certain way. They wore their beard a certain way. They had their head garments a certain way. They prayed out loud so people could hear them. They act so holy. And then Jesus flipped the script and says, no, that's what's on the outside. I'm concerned more on the inside. So today we're going to continue more on the inside, but we're going to deal with relationships amongst believers. And it has an effect on relationships with unbelievers, but he's focusing on unbelievers because if we can get that right, then we can get the rest of it right there. So that's where we are right now. One thing I want to just say that I found out in my life is that the hardest thing that we will have to face, I'll give you 3 of them. And these are my 3 things that have been a challenge for me, a good challenge, but it's very difficult. One, the hardest thing that you ever find to do is follow Jesus Christ, to live out the life of the Christian. That is the hardest thing that you can do. Difficult. It's an ongoing process. It takes a commitment, and it takes a lifelong process of sanctification, working out your salvation. Very hard to do. The second thing is marriage. Marriage, you have 2 imperfect people coming together to try to have a perfect marriage, a good marriage. Very challenging. Jesus is going to talk about that today. And then the third, which is not going to talk about today, which I think is raising children, is very difficult. So I think being a Christian is the hardest thing, living out what it means to be a Christian, living out what it means to have a Christian marriage, and then raising godly children. Those are the 3 things that I think, top 3 things that Christians face in this life here. So let's look at our lesson. I'm excited about it. We're going to have a good time. If you're enjoying this lesson, again, hit the like button on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too. That would be very, very helpful. So our first verse is, you have heard that it said, those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. You have heard, meaning that they have heard the commandments. They have heard what was written a long time ago. They had heard that was talked about when Moses gave the 10 commandments coming down from Mount Sinai. These things are not new. This is old. This is ancient literature. You have heard it. He said, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable for judgment. This is the 6th commandment of the 10 commandments. And the law was that if you murder somebody, then you're liable for judgment. If you premeditated to kill somebody, then you are liable for judgment, which in that case usually was the death penalty. It's not talking about manslaughter. It's not talking about accidentally killing someone. It's not talking about killing someone in self-defense. What it's talking about here is premeditated murder, makes you liable for judgment in the legal system of that day, which could result into the death penalty. Now, in that day, everybody knew that was wrong. That's the big picture. The Pharisees knew they were wrong. They were not murderers in that sense of the word. They did not premeditate to kill somebody. They upheld that. But the key is that, and we're guilty of it too today, is that we look at these heinous crimes and we think that just because we're not a murderer, we're not a thief, or we're not an embezzler, or we're not this, we're not that, then we're doing okay. And that's what the Pharisees thought. I don't do this, I don't do that, I don't do the big sins, so I must be a righteous person. So Jesus is teaching today to dispel that, in a sense that just because you don't do the big sins doesn't mean that you're right with God, doesn't mean that you're a righteous person. I'm going to tell you what it means to be a righteous person. It matters what's on the inside, what people can't see. That determines whether or not you're going to be a righteous person or not in the eyes of God. God looks at the heart. Man looks at the actions. God knows the true story, and he has the last say so on who's righteous and who's not. So Pharisee was saying, I'm not a murderer, I'm righteous, I don't do those things. But look what Jesus does. Okay, you may not be a murderer, and you may not do those things, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable for judgment. He talks about if you're carrying anger against your brother or sister in Christ, it may not be as bad as murdering somebody, but you're liable to judgment. In fact, what Jesus is saying is that people just don't wake up one day and murder somebody. Generally, that does not happen, generally. But usually a murder happens when someone's angry at somebody. And Jesus is saying that if you don't control your anger, the very beginning of that process of murdering somebody, then you're going to be in trouble. And you may not kill somebody, but if you're walking around angry at somebody all the time, guess what? You're liable to judgment. Then it says here, whoever insults his brother will be liable to counsel. So not only do we have to worry about controlling our anger, our ill feelings toward one another, and getting that in check, anger sometimes can manifest itself out in how we treat other people. And that's a sin too. And that's liable to judgment too. And what that means is that if we're walking around insulting people, putting people down, and this insult word is raka in the Greek, and what that means is that you're doing it in such a way that you're demeaning that person. You're making that person feel as if he or she is a nothing. You're calling them an imbecile. You're calling them an idiot. You are trying to attack them at the lowest level. You're making it very personable, and you want them to feel like they're worth nothing. And what Jesus is saying here is that when we insult our brother, when we slander, when we make fun of, when we talk about, when we do those things, we are also liable to the council, liable to judgment, have to give an account for it. And so we should not be doing those things. As what Jesus is saying, that as kingdom people, we have to control our anger. Don't make sure when we have this anger, we don't sin. And then we got to worry about this insulting people, talking about people, tearing people down. And going back to that anger, I want to just reemphasize is this, that not all anger is bad. Not all anger is sinful. What Jesus is talking about here is this sinful anger, this anger that has the harmful intent. If you remember in the Bible, there's such thing as a righteous anger. Jesus had righteous anger when he turned over the tables in the temple when they were dealing with the money changers. They were taking advantage of people. You should be angry about injustice in the world. You should be angry about the evils in the world. You should be angry about things that God is angry about. But when our anger becomes personal and hurtful, premeditated, ill will, that's when we sin. So now we got insulting as a manifestation of that. Another manifestation of that says here, Whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. And what Jesus is saying that what our anger can bring judgment on us. And when he says, you fool, when you call somebody a fool, what Jesus is saying here, you're saying that they're morally corrupt. What you're saying is they're ungodly. They're an immoral person. See, sometimes the Christian, we tear people down. We do what the world does. In church, we gossip and we slander and we say that guy. I wonder if that person saved. That person is so ungodly. We are not to say those things out of our mouths. We don't do those things. And Jesus will give us a way to handle, the right way to handle our anger here. But we have to watch out what's in our heart and what comes out of our mouths. Because what's in our heart, that anger is in our heart, it's going to eventually, if we don't keep it in check, it's going to manifest ourselves. And so here the Pharisees were worried about what's on the outside, which in reality they should have been worried about what's on the inside, that anger and bitterness and jealousy, all that stuff that was brewing up inside of them. And then he says here, so if you are offering your gift at the altar, and remember that your brother has something against you, leave the gift there before the altar and go. A lot of times in church, we think the most important thing for us to do is to give our tithes or offering, give our sacrifice, take our envelope, raise it up in the air, bring it down, place it in a basket so people can see. We think that's the most important thing. Now, we should do that, and we should always do that, but Jesus says this. If you're at the altar and you're getting ready to give your gift, your sacrifice, and you know that somebody has a claim, doesn't mean that it's true, doesn't mean that it's right, but you are aware that somebody has a claim against you. He's saying, don't give that gift, or before you give that gift, go and reconcile with that individual. When it says here, remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift, therefore, before the altar, and go and reconcile to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. What matters most to Jesus is that you are reconciled with that brother who has a claim against you. And so what Jesus is saying is that relationships are important. Kingdom people who are part of my kingdom, people who are under my authority, people who one day will spend eternity in heaven, they value relationships with their brothers and sisters, and they were willing to do anything to reconcile that. In this case right here, you may not have done anything against that person, but you know that person has something against you. Humble yourself and go and talk to that person. Humble yourself and go and try to reconcile. Humble yourself and ask that person, is there something I've done to offend you? Let's talk about it. You know, another thing is that if somebody has offended you, on the flip side, sometimes we hold it in. And I think it's true too. We go to the altar and we know that we have offended somebody. We should, before we give our gift there, go back to that person and reconcile them also. Because sometimes Christians, we have a tendency to hold on to things. And one thing I've found that if you know somebody has a claim against you or you're up with somebody, we can handle it quickly. As soon as that conflict arises, it can be handled in a matter of words. It can be handled in a matter of minutes. And what the problem is that when we know somebody has something against us, whether it's right or wrong, or we're mad at somebody and we don't do anything, it gives time for Satan to come in and to make that thing worse than what it is. And I know many of us have seen that happen in real life. Something that is real small, something that could be nipped in the bud, just a matter of clarification, just a misunderstanding. Something was said, it was taken the wrong way. It could be nipped in the bud quickly, but we don't handle it appropriately and in the right manner, and it becomes something huge, and it gets out of control. And what Jesus is saying here is that before you do this, give anything to me, I want to tell you what's most important to me is to reconcile that relationship and then give your gift. It doesn't say hold on to your gift until you reconcile. No, it doesn't say that. But if you're there, reconcile first, then come back and give God what's his, and that will be an acceptable offering to him. If you are go give a gift to God and you're angry all the time, God, that gift means nothing to God because your heart's not right. What God cares about what's on the inside, what people can't see. Only he can see that. Then it says also, look at this one. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and to be put in prison. Like what I just said, handle it quickly before that situation gets out of hand. How many times have we had relationships within our family? Family members have gone years without talking to other family members. How many times we've had problems in the church? People get upset. They leave the church, but we don't see them again, never to be able to have that opportunity to reconcile. And so what it is that handle that situation before it escalates into something bad for you and bad for that individual, because sometimes once it gets to a certain extent, it can be almost unrepairable. So Jesus says, handle it quick before it gets out of hand. Then it says, truly I say to you, you will never get out until you pay the last penny. That thing can go on for a long time, cause irreparable damage, abundance of consequences. I urge you, if there's a problem that you have with your neighbor, the problem that somebody has with you, go reconcile. Take the first step. It's usually that person who is the most spiritual is willing to take the most move. So when I'm at first move, so I'm asking you to search your heart. Think about it. Is there someone you need to talk to? If there is, move quickly, move perfectly. And then there's another issue. Not only do we have to deal with anger in our heart, we have to deal with lust in our heart. We got to get a hold of that. Verse 27 says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. That's the seventh commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery in this sense is any type of sexual sin. A sin between an unmarried person and a married person. A sin between a married person who's married to someone with another person who's married to another person. That's a sin. Any type of homosexual relationship is a sin. Any type of relationship between an unmarried person and another unmarried person. Any type of sexual sin is outside the confines of a marriage. Jesus is talking about right here. He says, but I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Pharisees walked around and said, I don't do this. I don't commit adultery. I don't murder. I don't steal. I don't do this. But Jesus says, look in your heart. Ask yourself, are there any lustful feelings in your heart? Now, what Jesus is not saying is that if you see an attractive woman or you see an attractive man and you find that person attractive, hey, that's no problem there. But when that attractiveness and finding that a person attractive crosses over to a lustful desire and all types of sinful thoughts come into your mind, and then you start wanting to do something with that person or have sexual relations with that person, that's when it becomes sin. That's when it's a problem. And Jesus is saying, although you may not be an adulterer in the physical sense, in the actions, you're an adulterer in your heart, which is just as bad. So he's saying, kingdom people, watch what they're thinking about. They control their heart. They control their passions. They don't have adulterous ideas or meditate upon sexual relations with someone other than their wife, or if they're single, sexual relations with another person. Look what he says, how to handle it. Very practical. Now, this is what is called a hyperbole. It's an exaggeration in scripture to illustrate or overemphasize a point. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than to lose your whole body, be thrown in hell. Then it says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. What does that mean? A lot of people have thought, do I literally take my right eye out? Do I literally cut my hand off? Again, I said it was a hyperbole. It was an illustration to emphasize a principle. And the principle that Jesus is trying to emphasize is that whatever is blocking you between a relationship between God and yourself, you need to get rid of it. Whatever is causing sin in your life, you need to get rid of it. That's what he's saying. Do whatever is necessary. He's not asking you to maim yourself. He's not asking you to cut your hand off, pluck your eye out. He's not asking that. He says, whatever is blocking that, get rid of it. Go away. Let me give you some examples here. If you have a job that is causing you to sin, you work at a bar, you work at maybe a casino, you work somewhere where there's constant temptations, then you need to quit that job. If you are at a job and there's someone there that you're attracted to, and they may be attracted to you, and it may cause you to sin, to have an adulterous relationship or have a fornication, then somebody needs to go, either transfer out of that department or look for another job. But don't put yourself in a place where you will be tempted to sin. If you're watching movies and the movies are R-rated and they have sexual scenes, and that causes you to think about things, have lust in your heart, wanting to go and have relations or sexual relations with somebody that's not your wife or you're not married to, then what you need to do is stop watching those things. You know, and I know it's difficult in this time and day because I watch Netflix, I watch the Prime Video, I watch Hulu, and sometimes you're watching those shows and you read the preview, it looks like it's a clean a movie or it's unrated and it's going smooth. Next you know, a scene comes in. And what I do is I cut it off right then and there. And two things I do. I either skip over it, or if I think it's going to happen again, I cut the movie off and I don't watch that movie. Because I don't want to have that thought in that mind. When you start watching those things have a tendency to stay in your mind and they're hard to shake and they can cause you to sin. So as soon as you approach with something that's indecent, that's going to cause you to sin, cut it off, turn the TV off, turn the radio off, don't listen to that, turn the computer off, those type of things. Get away. If you're hanging around friends and they're going to get you in trouble, they are cheating on their spouse and they're doing things that you know that is wrong, then cut those friends off. Do whatever you can to preserve that relationship you would have with God, to keep that relationship righteous. And anything that gets in the way, cut it off. Watch what you wear. Watch what kind of cologne you put on. Don't attract those type of things to you. Cut it off. Be willing to make that sacrifice. I hope I made myself clear. Now, a controversial one in verse 31. I want to say this. God has a high value on divorce. And the problem that in the first century that we have now in this 21st century is that it's easy to divorce. In the first century, it was easy to get a divorce. They had took the seventh commandment about divorce, about issuing a certificate for divorce that Moses gave them, and they took it and they expanded it, took it completely out of context. And the reason why Moses had the man give the woman a certificate of divorce was simply to protect the woman. Women, it would allow them to remarry. You got to remember, women did not work. They had a hard time making means. They were seen as second-class citizens. And so usually the way that she was able to have a livelihood was through her marriage, being married to a man. And so by issuing your wife a certificate of divorce allowed her to remarry and to be taken care of. And that's what it was for. And then also it prevented the man from trying to marry his wife back and treating her like she's some type of property or cattle or livestock. So it was there to protect the woman and to make sure she was going to be okay. And also it prevented her from being called an adulterer of any kind. So that's what it was for. But in the first century, they would get divorced left and right for any reason. And this is what Jesus is trying to address. The question, what reasons can I get a divorce for? They were getting divorced. I don't like your cooking, divorce. You made me mad today, divorce. I didn't like what you did on this situation or what you said to me, divorce, and would leave the woman stranded. And Jesus is trying to reconcile that because Jesus, the idea for God's perfect marriage or the marriage that's according to his will is for it to last a lifetime. And for you to get divorced left and right, it cheapens the marriage and it cheapens what God has put in place between a man and a woman. So here what he says, it also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give a certificate of divorce. We talked about that, the seventh commandment. But I say to you, I'm going to take it one step higher. I'm going to give it the deeper meaning. I'm going to give it past the superficial meaning, past the meaning that you just see with your eyes. I'm going to give it the meaning that comes from the heart. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. What do you okay? You think adultery is just this, and that? No, if you get a divorce for any reason other than sexual immorality, someone cheating on someone having sexual relations outside of marriage, then you are making, man, if you do that, if you are getting divorced for any other reason than that, you are making your wife an adulterer. You are making her commit adultery. And the way you make her commit adultery, because she remarries and you didn't have proper grounds for divorcing her, you are making her adulterer when she marries that man again because the divorce was not valid. And then whoever marries that divorced woman who did not get divorced for the proper reason commits adultery. It's a tangled web. And so you may not think you're an adulterer on the outside. You may not have committed the act, but when you get divorced improperly and that woman marries someone or you marry someone, then both of you become an adulterer. Jesus is trying to put a high value on marriage. Doesn't want an easy divorce. Wants marriage to last a long time. But he understands that when someone has been cheated on, or when there's infidelity in a marriage, it can cause problems. Now, here the case here is that Jesus doesn't say you have to get a divorce. Even when there's adultery in it, Jesus wants to see if it can be reconciled. If it can be reconciled, guess what? He wants it to be reconciled. But if it cannot be reconciled, if the person is just habitually committing adultery, ongoing, then the best thing is to get a divorce. But if it's a one-time thing, then maybe you should try to work it out for the sake of the marriage, for the sake of the children. And if you can work it out, then it will be a good marriage again. What is Jesus trying to say in this passage here? I care about what's in the heart. Is Jesus rewriting the Old Testament? No. He's giving the Old Testament, the law, its proper interpretation. He's giving it the interpretation from the kingdom point of view, from what's on the inside. Remember, what Jesus wants us to do, what God wants us to do, is to be a holy people. And a holy people starts what's on the inside, and then what's on the inside manifests with itself on the outside. It doesn't go on reverse. It doesn't go what's on the inside manifests itself on the inside. It doesn't work that way. Jesus wants us right in the heart. He cares about what comes out of our mouth. And my challenge to you, if there's someone out there that you're angry with, get a hold of that anger. Give it to God. Don't insult that person. Don't talk about that person. Don't try to belittle that person. Don't try to make that person feel like they're low and worthless. Don't do that. Handle it properly. If you're in a marriage situation that's not going well, get counseling. Just don't get married, then again, and then again, and again. Find out what the root cause is. Do your homework before you get married. Get counseling before you get married. Look at yourself and see if I'm the marriage material. Don't always blame it on the other person. The hardest thing that you'll do is walk that Christian life, have a godly marriage, and raise godly children. The hardest thing. But God gives us a roadmap in Matthew chapter 5. God bless you. Love you much. Till we meet again. God bless you. If you want to reach me on my email, jwwilson@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions. God bless you.